Exactly.
The School Innovation and Turnaround Committee is now called to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Bofi?
Present.
Mr. Davis?
Present.
Ms. Edmonston? Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Ms. Holloway?
Present.
Dr. Jones? Present. Ms. Lewis?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones is not in attendance. Mr. Rock? Is out. Dr. Thomason?
Present.
And Ms. Vaucher. All right, you have a quorum.
Madam Chair, your consent agenda is ready for approval. Adding item 2.1.
Can we get a motion on the floor to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
We need a second. Second. Motion by Mr. Davis, second by Mr. Garvey. Next item, please.
Your first item is on page 4. Item 2.2, consideration of status reports regarding types 2, 4, and 5 charter schools. The department recommendation is to receive the charter school annual report and to receive the charter school enrollment report pertaining to economically disadvantaged students and students with disabilities.
We need a motion on the floor to receive.
So moved. Or second.
Moved by Mr. Davis, second by Ms. Holloway. Do we have any comments?
Yes.
Before we receive the comments from the floor, Superintendent White, do you have any comments on this item?
I will on the charter items that where the board has decisions regarding specific contracts, but not on the report.
Okay. We have a card for Sarah Vandegrift, who would like to speak. So if Ms. Vandegrift can come down, and also Gary McCoffin, who would also like to speak. All right, Ms. Vandegrift.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Vandegrift, Legal and Policy Director for the State Charter School Association. My comments are really more just a reflection of making sure on the public record, because these two items usually have a little bit more raising of public red flags or debate for the charter school community. And I would just want to say on 2 points. One, with regards to the status update on the performance of charter schools. As we all know, that this board is definitely one of the leading authorizers in the country that definitely takes action against charter schools of when they are not meeting their performance measurements. Around the country, Louisiana is actually one of the fewer states that have what's called strict accountability. We have the highest stakes in terms of charter schools. Other states don't tie charter school renewals to their actual academic performance. And this is a way that we think that Louisiana is leading the country. And as we all experienced last December, we actually followed through on that. So while this report highlights some of the more successes with charter schools, it also highlights some of those who are underperforming. And we definitely believe in the strong accountability that comes with that. In terms of the second aspect of it, in terms of the more student demographics report, we know that this also normally brings great contention around people about who charter schools are serving and how they are required to serve certain students. And I just want to remind people of the fact that within the law that talks about the mandates of charter schools serving certain economically disadvantaged and students with special needs, there's also a section in the law, Section E, that's part of the law, that says in the event that a charter school is not meeting these requirements, the board develops and administers a process for investigating the issue, following up with the school, and determining what the charter school, the local authorizer, including the authorizer, need to do in order to implement corrective action plans. And you all have done just that. So while there are many, I will not say many, while there are charter schools that have been flagged in the report for definitely not meeting their economically disadvantaged and special education students, I will commend the Department of Ed for following up with each of those schools, implementing corrective action plans, and most of the schools, to my knowledge, are all following through with no qualms. Also, just a reminder that the Charter School Performance Compact that you all approved that will take place next year will actually, for the first time, have these points or lack of points as part of the charter renewal decision, so that when you come through next December, you'll have more information at your fingertips in terms of the charter school renewal process. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCoffin?
Charter Foundation has had schools in that. One of them in particular, the southern part of our parish, is in a community which doesn't have. I'm sorry. Try that again. Representative Lafayette Charter Foundation, we have 2 schools in Lafayette. On the southern part of our parish, our cohort of schools with the Lafayette Public School System, we have a total of 4 schools in the town of Youngsville. So I looked at those 4 schools so I could see how we compare in terms of disability service and also economic youth that we serve. The question that I've got, and you're not going to be able to answer it today, was when I looked at the information on the website and compared those percentages with what is in the report, I'm finding a discrepancy that I can't reconcile, and it varies, it seems, from 7 to 10% on those 4 schools. And so I don't think it's going to affect probably the action that you're taking today, but I'm having trouble reconciling that data, and I'd like to make you aware of that.
Thank you. We also have another comment card, Mr. Frank Inclon.
I wanted to point out some information on that. If I heard him right, he said that the goals that his schools are asked to meet vary from one school to another.
I think he was just talking about the numbers in the report are different from his actual numbers.
We've been in dialogue with all the schools. We can follow up with Gary. We obviously work closely with him, and we're happy to.
Because there are reasons why it would vary.
Yeah.
I think he ought to get the information as to why they would.
Yes, fair enough.
Morning, Madam Chair. Frank Endem for Bell Chase Academy. I have prepared a response to the enrollment report relating to that school. I've given it to Sean for distribution to the committee and to the superintendent. And in lieu of making any formal statement, I would present that paper. Thank you.
Dr. Jones?
Could we take just a minute to read this? Since
Yes.
I've just seen it.
We take a minute to read this.
While the members are reading, can Patty Glasser come down?
For schools, especially charters, we do.
Board members, have you finished reading the document? Do you have any comments about the document? Dr. Jones?
Well, I think he's raised some legitimate issues that maybe we need to have a little dialogue about here. So I don't know how you want to go about doing that, but Superintendent White, have you read it? Do you see?
Yes, and you should know, as Mr. Endem knows, that there has been a very voluminous dialogue over the course of not just months but years related to these issues. So I'm happy to invite our team, maybe Assistant Superintendent Narachania, to come explain where we are on this, and if we do get into a legal issue, we can have our attorneys address it as well. Just to frame it, that discussion that we've been having back and forth, it's not an issue of ill will or negotiation. It's just a question of interpretation of statutes. So it's just an interpretative matter. Maybe you could provide us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what's on the document that you have in front of you.
Oh, sorry. I think.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think it's the
last page, the last paragraph.
Oh, got it. Okay. So we've been in ongoing email communication and in-person communication with Mr. Endem and Ms. Dye, who lead Belle Chase Academy. We're happy to continue to be in conversation with them. Unfortunately, because of the weather challenges last week, I think our legal team couldn't meet in person, but we are happy to continue to meet with your team, Mr. Endem, and we can make time to do so moving ahead.
And the issue, if I'm correct, for discussion that I've been seeing on the very heavy email traffic has been that there is a concern that the way that students that have specific demographic backgrounds are being counted does not account for the specific circumstances at Belle Chase Academy, especially given a military population, children of military population at the school. Is that
that attenuates the problem? Yes. It is a small population among less than 10% of the school's population.
Yeah. So there is a highly technical question about how 10% of the student population is counted in the denominator to establish a percentage of students who have, for example, disabilities, that changes the way that this number reads in this report for this one school. And that is I don't know that we're going to resolve much of it here because it really is a question of legal interpretation. And Mr. Endem is not an employee of the school. You are, if I understand, the attorney. Yeah, the attorney for the school. Therefore, our attorneys have been having this discussion. Certainly happy to answer any questions, but that's the nature of the dialogue.
So it's a question over whether a 504 child with accommodation counts. Is that the issue?
That is one of the issues.
One of the issues,
That's
yeah.
one of the issues, yes.
Well, and just to make a comment, I don't want to get in the middle of this, obviously, but if 504 children would count, then the requirement would be higher than it is percentage-wise. Because when you're looking at what 85% of what it would be to set the target date, the 504 children are not counted to establish the target. So either we'd have to count it both ways to establish the target, and if it meets it, or not count it, one way or the other.
That is correct. If I might comment, we're talking about 504s who have special education services attached as an accommodation to their disability. So it's not a 504 with a broken arm. It's a very limited group because of the statute, the way it's worded, we understand. And we have agreed with administration on the two elements. One, an evaluation according to regulations, and two, special education and related services have to be combined in order to qualify for a student with exceptionality in this category.
Frank, what would you like from the board here today? I know you presented this. We've agreed we want to continue in a discussion. We just couldn't meet because of the weather. So
this is really a protection of the record, if you please. We want to have continuing dialogue, have clarity, not only for us, but for other charters may be affected as well. And we're perfectly happy to deal with the legal staff and the administrative staff in resolving the question. We just didn't want to acquiesce, if you please. That's why I simply wanted to give a written position just to protect the record.
Understood.
Thank you. Dr. Jones?
Well, and I think part of the problem is that we have for want of a better term, a simplistic law that has very complicated applications of that law, and I'm not sure that it can be applied as simply as it was written. And so I think there are cases here, for example, when 90% of a school population is not like the others, how you can apply just arbitrarily the things. I know that may be the way the law reads, but it also reads for us to do an investigation and so forth, and I think we do that, and I think if there's reasonable explanations as to why these different occur, that I personally feel like BESE can accept that explanation if it makes sense.
If I might comment further on Dr. Jones's statement, one of the outcomes may well be a development of a appeal and waiver process for unique circumstances that are presented, such as our case. It is, I think, is silent now under board bulletins, but there's an informal process that maybe formalizing it might bring clarity and finality to this ongoing year-long discussion.
And please know that the only times when we don't demonstrate flexibility are those times when the kind of boxiness of the law is telling our attorneys this is what they should do. I don't think anyone wants to not acknowledge the nuances of this situation. It's just a question of lawyers having to do what they believe the law is telling them to do. But what I will commit is we will continue to meet with Ms. Dye and Mr. Endem, and if you want us to bring back a report, happy to do that for the board.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman?
Mr. Garvey?
Yeah,
yes.
before we leave this issue, and Ms. Naracherne goes back to her seat, I did have a question about one of the, I lost the page, one of the qualifications, here we go, for economically disadvantaged students is students that are eligible for health care assistance. Can you tell me what it means to be eligible for health care assistance? How do you determine that?
We get so economically disadvantaged is determined for multiple purposes, for the purposes of MFP, as you know, as well as for the purposes of this particular calculation. So we use the information that's provided to our finance team, and that information sort of is used to ultimately determine if kids are eligible for economically disadvantaged. We've tried to make that definition uniform in law in the last session, and so I'd have to ask Beth specifically how she gets that information.
So you don't know if that's a student that's eligible for Medicare?
Yeah, we do.
Medicaid?
I just don't know the exact place from where she gets that. But yes, it's eligibility for public assistance for health care.
For the federal
Yes.
public assistance?
Medicaid.
Yeah, I may have to follow up with you on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Members of the committee.
Next, Patty Glasser. Yes. Did you press the center button?
There you go. Okay. I'm Patty Glazer. I'm head of School of Kenner Discovery. Kenner Discovery has been in operation for 5 years. We have 3 consecutive A ratings. We educate 1,216 students from pre-K through 10th grade. And I'm here about this issue. I think it's well said that the law is simplistic, and then the application of it presents challenges for school leaders and mainly for families. So let me also state that I thought it was important to come here today and speak about it. I think my issue is more of a legislative issue in the way that the law actually reads, as well as a local application of that. So as Superintendent White said a few minutes ago, would lawyers feel obligated to demand at a local school board level based on the exact reading of the law? So for Kenner Discovery, we are 2.4% under the economically disadvantaged. We are 5.5% over the SPED population. We've done things all along. We're a high-demand school. We have over 1,300 applicants a year, usually for about 150 seats. We've done all kinds of preferences for our lottery, including giving a preference in the past year for both, in the past many years, for SPED and for economically disadvantaged students. This coming year, we changed it and made it just for economically disadvantaged, knowing that we were a couple of points under for economically disadvantaged. We're good at SPED kids. We're not adverse to taking at-risk kids. The SPED community loves us. We now can't give them a preference because according to this very specific law, we're over on the number of SPED students we have, and we're under on the number of economically disadvantaged. So it's one of those odd places that we're in. We've been told locally that faculty kids and siblings cannot be accepted. Accepting siblings is just good family sense. Every school except the magnet school accepts siblings, private, public, parochial. It makes sense so that moms and dads aren't traveling to 2 and 3 and 4 different schools and supporting 2 and 3 and 4 different schools. We're now being told locally that we cannot accept siblings. So it's an application, a local application of a very restrictive law. It's not helping SPED kids that we're good at. We're not adverse to economically disadvantaged, and if you look at our lottery, we've increased those numbers every year for the past 5 years. So I thought it was important as a matter of record to come here and say it, so that hopefully we can work with legislators in the future and with people who are applying local applications.
All righty, thank you. Dr. Jones?
This just kind of, and your comments led me to look down at the sheet that you provided us a few minutes ago and quoted from us, our Bulletin 126, provides that economically disadvantaged includes the characteristics of a student who is eligible for reduced price meals based on the latest available data. Well, if I had a school physically located in my old parish, Rapides Parish, which has a high enough percentage of free and reduced students that it qualifies for a uniform, everybody gets free and reduced in the whole parish. Does that now mean that every kid that's in that charter school, because that charter school is located inside the boundaries of the parish that where every student is eligible under free and reduced? I think this is an application of what I'm talking about. We had a law written a few years ago that was good intent, simplistic, but now it leads to some really strange interpretations if we're not careful with it. Because I could see, for example, in the previous gentleman's case, if that's the case for the parish that Belle Chase is situated in for the parish at large, and in theory, every kid that came into that school would qualify as economically disadvantaged under that definition, because every kid would be eligible for free and reduced lunch. So, and I don't think that's what the intent of this law is. So I think we got some work to do, Superintendent White, and maybe I'm muddying it up even further by saying that. But
I don't disagree. Unfortunately, I mean, there's also a strong set of people who are urging us to use the law as a stronger anvil within as an enforcer, you know. And so I'm not saying either side is wrong. I think every side is well intended. But no question, this is the problem with a law that bases enforcement on averages. I mean, at what point do you say not everybody can be perfectly at or above the average? Because an average necessitates that someone somewhere is going to be below it. So, these were concerns that were raised in committee. They were, and so on. They've been debated. They've largely been rejected. I don't think we can change all of these things without a change from the legislature.
Well, what that makes me think of is the old definition of average. A man with his head in the oven and his feet in the refrigerator, his belly button is average. And so I think that's the issue we're dealing with here is how do we deal with the extremes? How do we deal with the situations that don't fit average?
Ms. Vaucher?
This is a very complicated issue. I think when the law was passed, it was not set to the average for the state or the district. It was 85% of the average, which then gave charters a leeway of 15% in there. So you could still be under the average by 15% and still meet the criteria. So I think some of that was taken into consideration at that point to have that 15% leeway. So the targets were set at 85% of the average, so you could be under. The economically disadvantaged issue and I have to say that Kunjan has done a really good job. In the very beginning of this, before there was tried to be a cleanup in the law on what is the definition of economically disadvantaged, it was many different things depending upon what issue you were looking at. So she and the department made a very good effort to try to standardize that language for the MFP, for the charter law, for all of the different types of grants that we have so that it would be standardized. Instead of using that free lunch, for the CEP, and I can tell you because my district we are putting schools under the CEP program because we do qualify for those. But what they do is your placeholder is the direct certification for assistance that the state has. That file is downloaded in lieu of the free lunch applications. So you're getting, the department is getting from the state direct certification data that takes the place of the free lunch data. So it's those people or families that have applied for that instead of the school having to fill out those applications, that is directly sent from the state of Louisiana to the Department of Ed for those direct certification numbers. Because I had to go and look at those myself when we were trying to make that decision. So what I think they're trying to do is streamline that data is coming from the State Department through these other programs, the Medicaid program for the kids who are on health assistance, the direct certification programs for the free lunch. So it's got all of those indicators. Now, I think I think districts and charters, I think we all need some education on what these terms mean, because everyone seems to have a little bit different idea of what the definition of economically disadvantaged is or what the definition of students with disabilities is. I think the averages and the targets being only the 85% of the average does give you a 15% leeway. So you don't have to hit the average. You can be within 15% of the average. However, those definitions, I think, need to be, I don't want to say cleaned up, but at least communicated effectively. When you're looking at students with disabilities, it's those students who have IEPs. So some of the 504 kids don't have an IEP to make them a student with disabilities. If we counted those 504 accommodation kids in there, we'd have to count those in the denominators to raise all of these targets. So it's not just a simple thing to do. But I think because of the impact on this, we do need to make sure that we all are operating and understanding what all of this means within the context. Now, as far as once we get that situated, to where everybody understands the rules and where all this data comes from. There are some charters that are very close. And, I think close and working toward it is good, to where we need to keep working to hit those goals. There are some charters that are very, very far away that I think may need some additional, maybe a more intensive corrective action plan if we look at it. But simplistically speaking, if these targets are far apart, I think when the lotteries come, then incoming students should have to meet these 85% targets. I'm not saying take every child, because you would have an overrepresentation of some grade levels and students coming in one given year. But if the incoming classes meet those targets, I think that's what we should be looking at, and eventually over the years, then the entire school will. So I don't think it's a corrective action that is going to be completed within a year or within 2 years, and it's really just started. I had a conversation with Kunjan after the March meeting, so this is really just beginning. So if we can get everybody on the same page on what these definitions are, how these targets are, established, and then we take a measured approach in implementation with incoming classes of students meeting those targets, we'll eventually get what the law was meant to be. I think in many cases, when I look through it, most of these percentages are close. They're almost there. So a lot of the no ones, it's not going to take that much. For the ones that are very far apart, it's going to take more of an effort.
Thank you, Ms. Boucher. Ms. Holloway?
Yes, I have a couple of statements, and I do agree, Dr. Jones, that we need to go back and revisit, or someone does, in regards to the policy, because it seems like we continue to have this conversation. Last year at this time, we had this conversation, and we're repeating the same thing. What I would like to say is that, and I'm not being biased because I've been on both sides, is that charters seem to have a higher standard in the requirements of having the socioeconomic status, the higher percentage, or special ed status, where we know, and after even reviewing this data year after year, that there are public schools within a district that doesn't meet the requirements within. And so when there is a revisitation of this, we need to really look at public schools maybe meeting the same standard. And we all know that won't be because of the location of children. So in requiring charter schools to have this high standard, and knowing the attempts that charter leaders make in recruitment, advertisement, you name it, to have that particular status, it's very difficult. So I just have to say that we need to look at the balance of this. Thank you.
Dr. Jones?
And I promise this will be my last comment on it. But in regards to the 85% target, 85% of 1,000 is a lot different than 85% of 10. Okay. And so when we look at an example of if an incoming class had 10 kids in it, and their disadvantaged proportion for the district was 6% or 10% or whatever, somewhere along there. So when you got 85% of 10 times the percent, and I know, Doris, you're shaking your head saying that it's not the incoming class, it's the whole school.
It's 85% of the percent, not the number.
Right, but that's my point. The further down you divide this, you ended up just like this gentleman had in his presentation here a minute ago of a fourth of a student, I think, or something like that. And so what is the practical implication of a requirement that says that and to be in compliance, the school has to have a fourth of a student more? Those are the things that concern me. I think common sense somewhere has to enter into this equation as to how we do these things and what it means. You know, if the department is following the law in terms of investigating and looking and trying to develop an agreed upon corrective action plan and the progress is toward that, then to me, I think the intent of the law has been met. I would hate to see a discussion around the table here one day about the renewal of a charter that was wrapped up on something so tiny as a minute percentage in one particular area of this thing when all the evidence indicated that they had done everything they possibly could.
Thank you. Any other board discussion? Ms. Boucher?
Well, just final thing, it's 85% of a percent. It's not 85% of the incoming number of students. So there's a huge difference in that. And I think a measure, nobody, and I certainly would not advocate non-renewal based on a minute number. I think that if we're working toward meeting those goals of the 85%, and we're seeing that movement and we're seeing that growth, then that's good and that's sufficient. What I'm talking about are possibly, if anyone, and I'm not even sure if any schools exist like this, that are very far off and are not making measured progress. And my whole intent is measured progress, not a fruit basket turnover of kids, not putting kids out, but, you know, traditional school districts have attendance zones. You know, charters, if they're type 2s, they draw from the entire, not only parish, but sometimes multi-parish areas. So their goal and their body of students that they're looking for, they have to meet the requirements within the body of students that they're pulling from. So when you're looking at attendance zones, it's very different in a traditional system versus either statewide charters, multi-parish charters, or even parish-wide charters. So that, I think that's why when the law was passed, and I don't think we have, unless somebody goes and changes a law, we have the responsibility to make sure that the law is followed, but in a measured way that makes sense. You know, I don't advocate non-renewal for schools that are working toward that and very close to it. I'm just looking for corrective action plans that everybody can buy into and look at incoming classes to meet those thresholds so that over a period of time, then the law can be met.
All righty, thank you. So we have a motion on the floor to receive both of these reports. Any opposed? If none, the motion carries. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 129, item 2.3, consideration of charter contracts for BESE authorized charter schools. The revised department recommendation is to defer the extension for Vision Academy and to approve 3-year renewals for JCFA East and Louisiana Key Academy based on the use of alternate frameworks.
So moved. All righty, Dr. Bofi initiated the motion, second by Mr. Garvey. Superintendent, you have any comments on this item?
I do. Members, as you know, we decided to bring to this meeting the specific set of schools whose renewals will be determined based on an alternate framework. What this means is these schools intentionally in their charters, when you approve them, serve a population of students with a particular challenge, and they only serve students with that particular challenge. In the case of Louisiana Key Academy, you have a school that serves exclusively students with dyslexia and severe reading needs. In the case of JCFA East, you have a school that serves particularly students that are overage, undercredited, or have a high likelihood of not completing high school. For that reason, these schools, while they are graded in the traditional accountability formula, receive renewal based on an alternate framework. Vision is a school that is up for extension. However, some additional fiscal concerns have come into light over the last week, potentially related to the school. We're therefore going to reserve our recommendation. We wish to work with the legislative auditor who is raising these concerns to find out more, and we will be thus bringing a recommendation to you at next month's meeting related to that school. But we do ask your approval of the 3-year renewal of these two schools. Let me say one more thing, and I was talking with Ms. Boucher about this yesterday. I think we all agree that we need to move in the direction of having a better accountability framework for alternative schools. Now then there's a question of, well, what is an alternative school amidst this set of programs and schools that serve different populations and so on? What is that? We will be, under the law, therefore, under ESSA, conducting a process that tries to get us to that place by late this summer or next fall. And we plan to start that through two means. I can share that with you in my board report tomorrow. I'll talk. That's not immediately relevant to this, but I wanted to say it so that you know that I would like to discuss this tomorrow in my superintendent's report as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Before we start board discussion, I'd like to go through the public comment cards. Debbie Shum, if she can come down, Sarah Vandergriff, and Millie Harris with JCFA. Oh, and Rachel Smith. I'll call the other cards as well, and maybe you can just come down and sit on that first row.
Good morning. I don't know if I'm supposed to go first.
Hold on. Let me call the rest of the speakers. Christopher Mira, and Ifura Bandeli and Owusu Bandeli. Come down to the first row, please. All right, Ms. Shum.
Thank you very much. Debbie Shum, representing Louisiana Association of Principals. And I think Superintendent White just addressed the concern or question that I have. And it's that if we're going to allow an alternate assessment for schools that are rated F, by looking at additional factors, there are lots of public traditional schools that have alternate factors or alternate populations, such as the school for the deaf, the school for the visually impaired, alternative schools around the state that have those populations. And in looking at this, there is indicators that look at the facilities, discipline, their special ed accommodations, health and safety, governance, compliance, and reporting. And I just want to make sure that when we pass policy that works for charter schools, that we don't forget about traditional public schools, and we give them the same opportunities if they have an F and want to make sure that they have it, that if they come up with a plan that looks at other indicators, that they get the same opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel Smith.
Hi, my name is Rachel Smith. I'm one of the...
Can you press the center button?
Hi, my name is Rachel Smith. I'm one of the many concerned moms. My son, Cooper, he has dyslexia. He went to a private school before we started the Key Academy. He's been going there for about 3 years now. He got very discouraged. He didn't want to go to school. He didn't like school. We put him into the Key Academy, and within 6 months, he is to the point to where he loves to read now. Before he goes to bed every single night, he pulls out a book, he opens it up, and he's like, Mama, I could read this. I love this. Now it's something he does it because he wants to do it and he loves to do it. And I don't understand the way they teach them is this whole decoding thing. I've tried to learn it. I don't understand it, but those teachers are awesome. And I just want to tell them thank you, and I'd appreciate it if y'all could keep the charter.
Thank you. Ms. Vandergriff.
Good morning, Sarah Vandergriff again for the Charter School Association. I just really wanted to say thank you to the Department of Ed and for you all to BESE for A, renewing some schools, but B, I think that especially within the past year, some great conversations have been had and progress has been made towards how do you hold school accountable that are serving a truly different or unique population of students to alternative framework. I know Millie here, as well as Elizabeth Osberg, who runs the NET in New Orleans, has been over the course of a year working very closely with traditional schools to figure this out. And I think the conversation needs to be continued. I think we know with a lot of the districts, some of these programs hide more in programs under individual schools because they are afraid to stand alone because of this sort of issue that you all are raising. So I would just say that I'm glad that charter schools are part of this conversation. I know Millie especially works very closely with districts, so sharing information about her program and best practices. And I am very excited to see that. I think that this is an area that for once, we actually see charters and districts trying to align and actually work collaboratively together. Thank you.
Thank you. Millie?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Millie Harris, Executive Director of JCFA. We run 4 charter school campuses, 3 in the New Orleans area, 1 in Lafayette. And I want to say thank you to the department for recommending us for renewal. I'm here today obviously to say thanks, but also to encourage you to continue to do the work. The framework that exists for extension and renewals for alternative schools is a good start for us to build the conversation out on how to have a rubric that truly and fairly assesses all alternative schools in the state, traditional public schools and alternative charter schools. We were very excited when we received the simulated 2018 SPS results. Our progress score was a very high score and a score that we look forward to increasing. Our December EOC scores show that we are moving students towards mastery, and that is what we want to do. But the current SPS is not fair to alternative schools, whether you're an alternative school that's a charter school or a traditional school. The work that we do every day is wraparound work. It is very intensive social work, it's very intensive academic work, and it needs to be assessed based on where the students are when they come to us and where they are when they leave us. And so I hope that you all will take the opportunity to continue the work that you're doing and provide all alternative students with a clear rubric that shows and commends them for their success, so that they walk in the community proud of the school they go to and not afraid to say they attend a specific school because it has a failing grade underneath a system that is not truly designed to accurately measure the work of those students or the faculty and staff in the building. So again, thank you for the opportunity to serve the students that we have. We love our students, and we're excited about the opportunity of continuing to do the work for the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you. Ifur Bandeli and Owusu Bandeli, you can come down, as well as Rena Grimion, Lauren and Maddie Beckman. All right, Mr. Mira.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Mira, and I'd like to thank the Board of Education for the recommendation to renew the charter for Louisiana Key Academy. For me, the biggest measure of success for my son, JR, is just the fact that he's shown such great improvement in his reading. I apologize for getting emotional, but JR was held back in kindergarten twice, and then we moved from Florida to Louisiana, and it wasn't until JR was in the 2nd grade where he started attending a school called Grasp Academy, which is very similar to LKA, where he started to succeed academically. I mean, he was diagnosed with his dyslexia in kindergarten, like I said. They wanted to hold him back in 1st grade. He started Grasp in 2nd grade, but when we came here to LKA, he still couldn't read. And it wasn't until last year in 3rd grade where he successfully completed the BLS program at LKA, and then eventually by the end of the 1st grade, or his 3rd grade year, he was reading at the 1st grade level. So this year, based off of everything that's been reported, he's reading on grade level. He took the Dibbles practice test yesterday and came back and told me after he got the results he was the most improved student on the Dibbles test in his class. And I just found out from Ms. Bourgeois this morning that JR read the announcements at school. So the biggest metric for me is the fact that my son now reads on grade level, which he couldn't do 2 years ago. And so I thank the board for the recommendation to renew LKA's charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ifura Bandeli.
Hi, I have an 8-year-old grandson who attends the Key Academy. We need the Key Academy. Now, the testimonies that I'm going to give are taken directly from my grandson's own words. This is really like his own testimony. He got in trouble in school for raising his hand wildly every time a question was asked. And when he came home, I asked him why. He said, Nana, because they think I'm stupid. I told him, I said, Sadiq, you're not stupid. I said, you're very bright. I said, the problem is that they don't know how to teach all children. They can't teach all children the same way. You don't fit in that box. You fit in a box over here with children with a different kind of brains, a very intelligent brain. He comes home from school now and he tells me every single day, Nana, school is awesome. We need our academy. We need Key Academy. And research shows that as many as 1 in 5 children are suffering with dyslexia in our public school system. So please do everything that you can to continue these schools and make them better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wusu?
Yes. Is it on?
Yeah. Press the middle button.
Okay, yeah. Yes, I'm Dr. Wusu Bandeli. I'm Professor Emeritus at the Southern University land-grant campus. I've had close to 50 years experience in terms of teaching, from both all the way down to preschool, which my wife and I founded the preschool in Baltimore, to the college level. And in my experiences, I found that often too many of our youngsters are stereotyped for many different reasons and treated as throwaways. And my grandson, Sadiq, was in such a category. Fortunately, he had strong family advocates, and I really feel sorry that so many of the youngsters who really need advocacy don't get it. But I'd just like to reiterate the point that my wife made in terms of what he says when he leaves school every day. He says, Baba, they call me Baba, it was awesome today. And that is not to say that they're not challenges. In terms of, he's a severely dyslexic student, but he's also extremely bright. He was in the gifted program before he transferred in. But I'm just so glad that we don't have to get a notice from the school saying that he acted up, and in some cases, even in the kindergarten, he was suspended. So I'm just so glad for the Key Academy. Normally, I'm a strong advocate of public education, but in this case, the public education system has failed dyslexic students, and we really need the Key Academy. Thank you very much.
Ms. Rena Grimion?
Hi, yes. My daughter goes to Louisiana Key Academy. I think one of the things that a lot of people tend to forget when they are dealing with children with dyslexia is they kind of ignore them because they don't know how to teach them. And I think one of the biggest problems is they get left behind. And I think one of the biggest things for the public schools is that's one of the things you want to focus on, is not leaving the child behind. A lot of times they'll just pass them on, let them be a problem for the next teacher, or let them be a problem for the next grade. And with Louisiana Key Academy, they don't do that. They're very, I guess, I get personal too, because they're very personable with each and every one of their children. My daughter's birthday was this weekend, and her teacher, Ms. Shelton, called her on the weekend wishing her a happy birthday because she knows how important letting the student know that they are cared for. My daughter can read now. I can understand her writing. She still is lacking with math, but she's, building that up. Her confidence level is so great now that she wants to run for student council for 4th grade, which is awesome. Her confidence level was not there. I have another daughter that's in high school about to graduate. She went to a different school in town where we could only afford to have her go there for 1 year to help her with her decoding. What LA Key offers is that stability and that financial stability to parents that couldn't afford something outside the box. And I just really support LA Key Academy, and I just ask that you do too. And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you Lauren or Maddie?
This is Maddie.
All right, we'll let Maddie go first.
Hi, my name is Maddie Beckman. I go to LKA. I'm in the 4th grade. I started here about 3 years ago in 2nd grade. I wasn't doing so well at my old school, but then I came here. I knew that I couldn't read so well as the other kids, but then when I came here, I found out we're all the same. We have different things in them that, like, we can't read like them, but we're as intelligent as them. And my school is really special to me because we get to have fun, and, like, even though we're different, doesn't mean that you can be mean to us, and that we're pretty much the same as you, we just have different abilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lauren Beckman. My daughter Maddie was diagnosed with dyslexia in 1st grade. We actually lived in Mississippi at the time, and she was not behind far enough in school for them to actually help us. We had to have her privately diagnosed, and we spent 3 afternoons a week in private therapy that we paid for out of pocket. My husband was offered a job transfer here, and we did our research and found that Louisiana Key Academy was offering a cutting-edge program that was not really done for charter schools or for free anywhere. Most places you have to pay to get what we get. She has excelled beyond me. She used to sit behind me and hide. Now she's out here talking to y'all. Her confidence is through the roof. Her reading level on her last double scored, she was reading with 98% accuracy on grade level. Now, that's not saying that she doesn't still have some challenges, but anytime we face any of those, her teaching group is right there with us. We had a challenge recently. I was there, and I met with every single teacher, counselor, everything that we had without even having an appointment. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your consideration for LA Keys Charter. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie, for your courage. All right, we have a few cards that support the recommendation but do not wish to speak. Taylor Collins with JCFA East. Ashley Mills with JCFA East supports the recommendation and does not wish to speak. And then also Eric Hine from JCFA East. He supports the recommendation and do not wish to speak. We'll open up for board comments now. Dr. Jones?
Yes. I just have a technical question for John. You know, it's difficult for us to vote on renewing a charter that has an F grade showing there when basically the law says otherwise. And then we've approved an alternative framework. My question is, will future iterations of this report the school performance score under the alternate framework, or will we still have this? Yes, because I think it's, you know.
I don't know. And the reason is that we're going to have to decide what is an alternate school first. And this is what I want to talk to you about in my superintendent report tomorrow, is that first you're going to have to make some policy decisions about what is an alternative school. And then we're going to have to design an accountability system to meet with that school. And I think that, you know, those definitions we're going to have to arrive at.
Okay, and that echoes what Ms. Shum said a while ago. Dr. Shum, that standard is for public schools, charter and non-charter. Yeah. And we have an agenda item later today of a very similar nature on another committee. Yeah. And I think it's critical that we've been talking about this when I was a superintendent 10 years ago. This same school that I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon came before BESE, and we were told that within 1 year we would have an alternate framework for those schools, and it's 10 years later. And so I sympathize totally with what these folks are saying. I sympathize totally with what Dr. Shum said a while ago, that, you know, this standard for an alternative framework needs to be applied across the board, and the school performance score for those measured under that needs to be what's reported, not this F that's stuck out there, because it doesn't do us any good publicly. It doesn't. It just gives the critics another opportunity to question our judgment on what we're doing.
If I may, the only thing I would say to the board that we need to take into account on the other side, I agree with everything Dr. Jones said, but is that rightly there has been a, what, Kathy, 40 years of an attempt for a movement toward inclusion rather than towards separate populations. Now, here, I'm not certainly going to contradict any one of these parents or educators coming to the table to talk about the effects on their children. Clearly, something very good here is happening. However, we need to not create an accountability system that creates an incentive for moving any child who has a classified learning issue into a separate setting. And I think that's where the tough part of this policy is going to come in.
Well, for the record, I'd like to say that I don't even agree with everything I say.
Ms. Vaucher?
And I first want to start off by saying I'm in tremendous support of renewal of these schools. I'm hoping that we get to a point in this state, and as Dr. Jones said, we've been asking for years and years and years a way to measure in the accountability system alternative schools. I'm hoping we get to a point where there is no need for alternative frameworks, because to me that's just doublespeak. School gets an F in the accountability system, and then we're going to do an alternate framework for those particular alternative schools. They shouldn't be getting the F in the accountability system. It should be a system that measures effectively what is happening in alternative schools, whether they be charter, traditional, or whatever. And we have got to push to get to that point. Now, on the last thing that Superintendent White said, that makes it very difficult. There are children throughout Louisiana who are dyslexic, who have other disabilities that are sitting in every school in this state. And when we look at an alternative school or a charter school, alternative charter school, whatever way we're going to label it, that deals with just that population, then we've got some special ed advocates that are tremendously against isolating those children. They're more into strict inclusion. Having been an educator for now 47 years, I've seen this pendulum swing back and forth and back and forth. And I'm not sure, like Dr. Jones says, what I believe anymore in terms of how do we accommodate children and help them to their best to learn effectively and still have them included in regular populations. And that's very difficult when you go school by school. I know many school systems look at doing something called lesson class size, where you group children together with similar disabilities in particular settings in their system, but then included within a regular school setting. I don't know how we're going to address those issues, but I sit here, I listen to Maddie. I have a nephew who is dyslexic. I know the struggles that families and people go through, not only with this particular challenge, but with challenges of all types. We have an accountability system in this state, and I'm just going to say it, that penalize children with disabilities within the penalized schools, children, whoever you want to say it penalizes for working with children. We don't go heavily enough on growth. You have a third grader, like this gentleman was saying, his third grade child is now reading on the first grade level, tremendous improvement, and then working toward reaching grade level. But when his child... He's a fourth grader, he reads at fourth grade level now. Okay, but before that, when he would take possibly that third grade test, then he is not going to be successful on the third grade state assessment. So that child would earn an F for the school or a 0 for the school. And in terms of, I don't care what you say, when that child gets his assessment results back and that parent sees the assessment results, don't think that is not affecting that child or that parent. You can say it's the school, but it's the child that's being affected and the parent. So how do we create an accountability system, especially for students with disabilities, that is fair to them, to the families, to everyone, that celebrates their successes, that focuses more on improvement than it does on status? And I think we've got to get people together who are pushing. We need a status grade. We need a status grade, and look toward with those students who struggle because of their disabilities or their challenges, that we are not looking just solely at status, and we more heavily look at what is their growth and what programs can we put in, and recognizing what the costs are and the staffing issues are, and then how to measure it within accountability. We're facing under the ESSA plan right now, schools throughout the state, when we get subgroup scores, where the subgroup scores for students with disabilities, when you do their own little school performance score within their school, is an F. And then we're looking toward making judgments about those students and those programs and putting corrective actions in place, to me, where we need to look more effectively on, much heavily on what their growth is. And I know that these are things that the department struggles with, we struggle with at the district level, but I guess just in concluding my remarks on this particular topic, that we have got to find a way to eliminate the need for alternative frameworks and look at, within the accountability system, how do we accurately measure the effectiveness of these schools, whether they be traditional or charter. What are the quality indicators we're looking at? What are the wraparound services that we need? And how do we effectively measure whether that school is successful? Because on paper, and forgive me, I don't mean to pick on Louisiana Key Academy, y'all do a tremendous job. On paper, they're an F school. So if people are pulling that data up and looking at it, it's an F school. You talk to every parent in that school, and they're going to say, well, this isn't an F school, this has been a godsend for my child, because look at the growth that he's making. So how do we incorporate these two? I'm hoping that this is the year that we finally get some kind of a model, not only for alternative schools, but then begin to work on how do we measure progress with students with disabilities throughout our schools in our state, whether they be traditional or charter.
Thank you, Ms. Boucher. Before we continue with board comments, I did get a recent comment card from Ms. Amy Baudouin. She supports the recommendation and she wished to speak. Do you still want to speak or you want to waive? Okay. Please press the middle button, when you talk.
Is the green light on? Okay, you don't need to hold the button down, it will stay on.
My name is Lance, and I'm in the 5th grade. I started in 3rd grade at that school. I used to go to Woodlawn Elementary, and I used to not understand things that I used to do. Then I went to Louisiana Key Academy. They helped me with the things that I didn't even know that were actually true. When I was there, I didn't even know half of the stuff was literally that they were teaching me. I was like, usually my teacher teaches me this, usually my other teacher teaches me that. I used to not think as like the other people in 3rd grade. I used to be very different. I went to 4th grade next. I used to understand things more than 3rd grade from last year. I used to understand things very, very kind of well. There was this problem, and on the test, I didn't understand it, and I was so confused because my teacher helped me when I asked that problem. Usually at my other school, I asked my teachers if they can help me, and they said, try to figure it out. I went to that school, and they just helped me. I got help, and I got a straight A. I was like, this is my first A that I ever got. My mom was very proud of me, and I was proud of myself. I went to 5th grade. I understand things very well,
but there was one thing that I did not understand. Why am I understanding things that I did not understand in my old school? I was so confused, and I was happy, and that's it.
And to kind of clear up his rambling, Lance was a student at Woodlawn Elementary, which is one of the top schools in East Baton Rouge Parish. He was in second grade, unable to read, unable to write, unable to understand anything, and all the school told me was they couldn't help him. They did not know how. They did not have the resources. There was nothing they could do but fail him second grade. And they moved him on first grade because as a group he was great. By himself he was not. And I started exploring, what could possibly be going on. He was then a behavior problem at the school because he was so frustrated and no one would listen to him. He actually passed the East Baton Rouge Parish School dyslexia screening that they give in the school. But I took him to a psychologist and severely dyslexic. So they recommended this school, his psychologist. And since he's been there, my second grader could not read, went into third grade. By Christmas was reading to me and writing and knowing his name. And it was just amazing the work that was done. His confidence went through the roof. Haven't had a behavior problem with him since. At one point in time, East Baton Rouge Parish School System told me that I needed to put him on medicine because he was severely ADD. Not ADD. The psychologist proved that wrong. And now he's a fifth grader reading chapter books, writing speeches, standing up in front of people, giving, answers to questions. And yes, I understand the LEAP scores are not great. But children on this level cannot take tests at that model. I have a daughter who attends Sherwood Middle, is in the gifted at Sherwood Middle, and has problems with these standardized tests. There are other states that have these screenings and these tests that they use for their dyslexia children. And, what do we do for the school for the deaf and the school for the blind? What kind of screenings do? They have specialized screenings for the schools. So why can't we develop one for this particular school? The school by my house that specializes in children with dyslexia is $12,000 a year. I could walk to this school from my house. $12,000 a year, that's just tuition. I cannot afford that. I'm a single parent working on my own. And I'm trying my best to do the best education for my children. And Louisiana Key Academy is the best solution. I'm very disappointed that they're going to stop at 8th grade. I wish they would go into high school because I have no clue what I'm going to do with him in high school. I haven't a clue. I'm hoping that, my goal is, and I think he will be ready to transition into a normal high school. But what if he's not? What am I going to do? Am I going to have the same problems I had before? And when he gets to high school? But now he is a happy, healthy 5th grader who reads, who loves to now play games. And I know most parents try to get their kids away from video games. My child could not play a video game, could not understand it, could not read it, could not do any of this by himself. Couldn't do it, period. But now he has the tools to do whatever he wants. And it's because of this school that we do it. And some kind of standardization needs to be addressed to get the grade up, an F. Either disqualify the way it's done or create a screening that better rates these students. And that is all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do you have any? Okay, Dr. Bolfie.
I want to, can you guys put your mics down? Thanks. This testimony was very moving today, and I just want to start by commending the leaders that had a vision for the schools that we're talking about. It takes a lot of leadership and dedication to even get schools like these in place. And then also commending the educators who've acquired the skills that this is definitely something that requires a different approach. And I just want to commend the educators who have figured out how to develop those skills and worked with others so that they're really meeting students' needs. And then the parents and your advocacy, and when you don't have a local solution, finding a solution and making that happen, it makes me think about children in my own district or in other parts of the state, and I have a concern that we're not meeting needs at scale, but seeing the students and where the needs met are something that's really reassuring, especially when we sit in these positions. But I also just want to thank the students who were here today and congratulate you guys. And in the spirit of an earlier discussion item relative to teacher recruitment, I want to tell you that I am sorry we weren't ready as a system when you first went to school and that you had some challenges at the beginning. I'm excited that you have the educators who are meeting your needs today, and I'm going to invite you into the teaching profession so that you can turn that around for other kids in the future. And if you're not interested in teaching, but instead if you're interested in politics, we also need really passionate, dedicated people to sit on this board. So I just wanted to open both of those opportunities for you because I see so much dedication and hard work, and it's going to take that. I also want to say, we've talked about the birth cohorts declining. I mean, when we can serve kids, we had 2 parents who came from out of state into Louisiana and are getting better options for their kids in the state. So maybe that's our recruitment strategy for the state population as overall, is that we serve children so well that people are moving to Louisiana so that their children can be served this well. And then I have to thank the other board members. We don't have Louisiana Key Academy in my district, but JCFA did open a school in Lafayette, and there have been several instances where parents who had no other choices, who were very desperate and at the end of their rope, had called me about the situation that their children were facing. And I just want to thank my fellow board members for giving me the solution to provide to parents, for those children to have the option, for them to have another call to make and another possibility. And so I'm excited about having JCFA in Lafayette and being able to make that recommendation and not having to say, I'm sorry, the system's not serving your child. And I understand that, but we've got a long way to go to change it. So having these options has been tremendously rewarding on my part. So thank you all.
Ms. Holloway?
Yes, thank you. Laura, Cassidy, thank you for this opportunity for children. And we heard their testimonies, and it was very touching. And this is what choice is about. And parents, the school is meeting your needs. But there's always a desire amongst members that we want to enhance opportunities and make things better. So I am going to, I need to ask a question about the framework. And Superintendent, I don't know if it's you or Kunjan to answer this question about the framework that's before us. Last year at this time, there were a couple other board members that were interested in developing this framework with Key Academy and also Max. And so great work was involved in this, along with Kunjan and teams of people. Last year at this time, we reviewed Key Academy's framework. So my question today is, this framework that we see today the same as what we saw in January last year? All indicators, even including from Key Academy, because I'm seeing something different. Okay, and for what reason?
Could she please come to the table?
Could she come? Yeah, here.
So on the school selected indicators, we removed one test and split one other test into 2. Let me
Is it TOWRE? TOWRE? Towery?
Yes, it's Towery. So we took that one out because we felt like there were multiple measures of similar things in the same for the school selected indicators. On the test that we split into 2, we split it into 2 because we wanted to make sure that both parts of the test counted equally. We felt like at the department level, this was a reasonable change to make. We often make these types of adjustments with alternative schools on their school selected indicators, and we do it in consultation with the school. But we don't change the department selected indicators.
Is this something that came from the State Department or from the school itself?
We worked with them on it together.
How did you know? I mean, it seems like I'm just asking because it's not the same as what we saw back in January of 16.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, we, again, have these discussions with alternative schools regularly, and we make adjustments as appropriate.
I guess the question, please, I know, well, you're up there serving as chair, and Ms. Edmondson, I guess the concern is, when was this done? And the concern about changing things midway when we know that this is a framework to give us information about school performance scores.
Yep, and so we, again, agreed on this framework last year. So it's
in January of last year or midway? Because January we saw something different.
Yes, so this framework is slightly different. In working with the school to collect data, understand what the data represents, figure out what data is most representative of the performance of the students, we agreed to remove this one test with them. That's a decision that we have made in other situations with other alternative schools on their school selected indicators previously. But I understand your point.
Yeah. And the next question I have is in regards to the framework, it's elementary and middle. Would you consider DIBELS as a good measure for middle school? Especially for dyslexia children with the reading area.
Yeah.
And CTOP, of course, is phonological. That's K and 1.
Yep. And Sandy, just so I understand, are you suggesting we change those metrics as well?
I'm just asking because if you want to enhance the reading skills of children with dyslexia, you really want to have an effective measure, because our goal is for them to succeed on state testing or whatever their goals are, their future goals. So that, I just noted that. And it's something to consider. And I'm not saying that STAR, math, STAR reading is the assessment as you progress monitor throughout the year, but it seems like there should be a measure that the school could use to continue in the progress monitoring and getting the children to a certain goal.
Yeah, and I think, just to clarify, I don't think these are the only assessments the school uses to monitor how students are performing. They're just the assessments included in the alternate framework. And that was a discussion that we had. So it's not as if the school is not using the TOWRE. They are just not using it. We just chose together not to use it in this particular format.
And to be cautious about changing the framework along the way, because I know public schools don't change their, their framework. And so we just want to make sure in moving forward with alternative frameworks and whatever we decide that needs to be done, just to be aware.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more comment following up with that. I think the issue for Ms. Holloway, and the issue for me and Ms. Edmonston is consistency, right? When things are brought to the board, and we approve them, and then, because I think it kind of came up in conversation, Max Academy, which is a similar school, the same framework that we saw last January was what was presented to us, for their approval. And so it goes kind of back to what I guess Ms. Volshe was saying. We need consistency. If we have two of the same type of schools as a board, we need to be able to make sure that we measuring apples and apples and holding everybody to the same level of accountability. And so if things are changed, we know we don't approve the frameworks, but we're under the assumption that things are going to be implemented in a consistent way. And so if this framework has changed and we have other schools that are similar, we're just asking that those be revisited as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we will be going back to the folks at the MAX to make sure that we're all on the same page about that framework.
Madam Chair.
Dr. Jones.
If I'm understanding what just occurred here, my memory was that we approved a framework last January. Was it? I think so. Are what we're saying is that the framework that we approved is not exactly the framework that was used to come up with the thing today?
So we looked at the data. The data wouldn't change the results. We have just, for the purposes of the upcoming contract, chosen to make adjustments to the framework.
Okay, here's my point on that. If we're going to approve it as a board, if you're going to make changes to it as a department, those need to come back to the board so that we know.
I don't first believe the board ever did approve the framework.
Well, if we didn't approve the framework, I know in the part of a conversation last week, we were told we did approve it.
In fact, I remember being asked the question.
No, it wasn't the conversation with you.
Got it.
Okay, but the thought was what we were seeing today was the evaluation of the framework that was presented to us when the issue came up last January. So I'm somewhat surprised to realize that and it may be a very minor change, but I do think that if that's going to happen, that the board should at least be aware of it and possibly even decide whether or not they want that to change.
Can I just say this? Here's what I think the challenge is. I think there's two things that have happened. First, we approved the school, and I think that having never approved a school like this and the max, other than this and the max, we didn't bake in the accountability system to the original approval. This was before anybody here, or most people here, were even on this board. I do think, looking back, that's a mistake. That's not the order of operations that should have happened. Well, what then happens? Already the group's got students, it's got a charter, it's up and running. We're overseeing it. You someday have to vote on whether to renew it. Who's really to say at that point how it should be judged? So there's a very fluid discussion that is, candidly, a bit of a game of chicken. I mean, you end up in a sort of negotiation. Some people say, well, you should have the same framework as the max. Some people say, well, yeah, we do this sort of similar to the max, but we're not exactly the same as the max. And so I think we were all in this very iterative, very circular discussion. I take responsibility at the outset for not, and this is, by the way, this is water under the bridge and happened a long time ago, but for not saying before we approve this school, we need to determine what's the alternate framework and if there is one. And I think Dr. Cassidy, myself, I was not Ms. Narachani at the time, we should have agreed at that time there was going to be an alternate framework. We let that decision slip, and as a result, it's not entirely clear after that point who exactly is responsible for saying what the alternate framework is. And I hope that the process that Ms. Vaucher was advocating for earlier will resolve that, because we never have this issue on 99.9% of the schools. And why? Because there are BESE regulations that say how it will be evaluated.
Okay, well, I'll buy that with one proviso.
Yeah, please.
So the explanation that I gather from this is it's a lesson learned, and then in the future, if you're bringing any other charter applications to us of a special nature like this, you'll have the evaluation framework accompany the request for approval?
We've always had it accompany the request for approval. Whether it has been an item for voting, it is a different question. It has not been.
Well, I would strongly suggest maybe in the future it might be, because I think it's terrible when we come up at 3 years after a school has been in place, and it comes up time for a renewal or an extension, and then we realize that we didn't set the groundwork right in the first place. And so, to me, if it's an alternative framework, if it's an alternative school, put it on the table at the beginning of the discussion, not at the end.
I agree. So I think that the way we operate, if for some reason the process that Ms. Vaucher was outlining earlier doesn't get to it still necessitates the use of an alternative framework. If we approve a school that for any reason will need to be evaluated using an alternate framework, I think the way that we operate should be to approve the alternate framework as part of the initial approval, rather than to let it be decided later whether there is an alternative framework and what it is. Because with laying no blame on anyone, it wasn't Dr. Cassidy's issue, it wasn't our issue, it was just a lack of foresight. That is what has gotten us here today, 5 years later.
Yeah, and Superintendent, with due respect, and to Dr. Jones's point and question, is that I don't think I'm alone on this board thinking that we had established a framework. And to hear the explanation today is fine. It's an explanation for today. But I do think there's something to be noted for us as a board and for you, Superintendent, that I feel like most of us, if not all of us, were very much under the impression that we had established that framework in light of today's conversation, we realize that it's not the case. That's a very important distinction for us to have in mind.
Understood.
Any other board comments? Okay, well, we have the motion on the floor. Any opposition? With no opposition, the motion carries. Next item, please.
Before I read the next item into record, I do need to make a correction on the Teacher Certification Appeals Council. I made a correction to the exec rec for David Beard. He is indeed Louisiana Association of Teacher Educators. I changed it in reading it into LAE, and that is incorrect. So the exec rec in your EE packet on page 155 is correct as printed. On this committee, your next item is on page 144, item 2.4, consideration of a request for a material amendment to the charter contract governing Vision Academy. The revised recommendation is now to defer the material amendment to use an alternative framework for the purpose of renewal decisions for Vision Academy until the March 2018 School Innovation and Turnaround Committee meeting.
Need a motion on the floor to defer.
Second.
Motion made by Ms. Boucher, seconded by Mr. Davis. Superintendent, any comments on this item?
No, thank you.
Any discussion or comments from the board on this item?
Yes, explain to me exactly what's happening with this now.
With the deferral?
It is to defer?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we have any comment cards? No comment cards, so we have a motion on the floor to defer to the March 2018 SIG committee meeting. Any opposition? Without any opposition, the motion carries. Next item, please.
That concludes your agenda. The next committee meeting will begin at 1 o'clock.